Hello, mystery quilters. We're ready for installment number 2. I'm so excited.
I hope you've had fun with installment 1.
Before we get going, I do want to just put out a big heartfelt thank you for all of you who have been so positive and encouraging to each other on the Modern Quilt Studio Patterns and Fabrics page.
You know, we knew you were a supportive group, but just seeing it every day in the encouragement, in the uploads, seeing everyone's palettes, it's energizing for all of us.
And there have been comments made about whether we should have a dedicated group for the mystery quilt, the Modern Mystery Quilt. We'll admit that we were not expecting it to be quite as big a group as it has turned out to be, and that moving forward for future mysteries, we will...
we'll consider that.
Yeah, we might decide to do that. The last mystery quilt group, or the last Quiltalong that we did was a lot smaller. So, you know, we will definitely take that for, you know, future planning and future thought. We do want to go ahead today and show you our current palette, what we're working on right now, where we are before we go into the second installment, because people have asked on the Facebook page, hey, can we see your progress?
So, and we want to show it, but I also want to remind you, what we're doing is what we're doing. This isn't what you have to do. But,
exactly.
But this way you can see where we are. And so we've laid out everything in front of us here.
Everything is labeled according to Bill's codes, secret codes.
And what I kind of want to show is you can see all of the units and blocks in our group 1 are here. The units and blocks, I don't have the little squares we cut here, but this is the group 2. And what I hope you can see in this overhead shot is clearly they're 2 different groups. Nothing here looks like it belongs there, or vice versa. And I know with mystery quilts, there can be a little anxiety.
Yeah.
Like, am I doing it right? And especially, I think people can get concerned when they're trying to put 2 fabrics together from, let's say, group 2 that contrast. And I think you can really see what it means here. Like, this is clearly kind of an aqua, that's a purple, this is a green, this is an orange. So you can still see all of the shapes, whether it's dark red and navy or purple and red, but it's, you know, each of you has your own palette. And so if you kind of do this, you should see there's one group, there's the other.
So a couple of things that people have asked in the Facebook group that are worth repeating here. If you didn't see our post yesterday in about FIFO, F-I-F-O, and our method of cycling through a very scrappy palette, look for that, because that's a helpful way to think about a method to make sure that you actually end up using everything. If you're using a very large palette,
it's just a little tip.
But the other thing is that some people have said, oh, if I'm using this blue or this teal with this purple in this block in installment 1, do I need to use those fabrics together in installment 3, for example? And the answer is no. And the illustrations are, the colors in those illustrations are chosen so you can understand the difference between group 1 and group 2.
Right.
And that if you're printing it out, that you can see that they're 2 different colors. We're not going to put a subtle... 2 separate, 2 blues that are close to each other in the illustration.
So don't worry about, oh, I used this purple in installment 1. I need it again in installment 3 or 4.
Right. So, and don't read too much into the colors and the illustrations. They're just there to demonstrate that they are 2 different fabrics. And they don't relate to anything. Yeah,
they're differentiators. So basically, if you do a block or a unit of group 1 fabrics in the next installment or the 5th installment, if you put it in this pile, it would look like it belongs. They may be different fabrics. Some people are doing very scrappy. Some are just using 14 or 12, fat quarters. So everyone's will be a bit different.
And we understand that this palette building part has been very challenging for some of you, and for many of you, but we know that a lot of mystery quilts are more paint by number, where you're given a palette and you're told, or specific fabrics even, and said 3/4 of a yard of this and half a yard of this and all of that. But we felt like we wanted to give people the option of being able to use scraps and being able to tailor their the colors of their finished quilt to colors they like, or colors if they're giving it to specifically, somebody wanted to give it to their son or something and wanted his favorite colors in the quilt. So, again, the whole idea is to help you make something that you wouldn't have been able to make on your own, with some coaching. But as a reminder, there's no prize for finishing first, and there's no problem with working at your own pace. So don't worry if you have just started and you're just getting your fabrics together. There's plenty of time for you. Don't think in terms of catching up.
Yeah,
and download the installments when you're ready.
At your pace.
The videos will be there whenever you're ready.
Right. But this installment 2 will be out, and if you don't have as much time this week, don't feel like it has to be done before installment 3 comes out. Just work at your pace, your comfortable pace.
Okay, so Bill is going to review with you. Okay, so I feel like we need like a warning label.
Trigger warning.
There will be bias cuts in this next installment, and I know
and it's no big deal.
Well, it is to them.
Yeah.
And for many people who are very, very anxious about cutting anything on a bias and cutting triangles, I would just encourage you to sort of take a step back and realize that if you were taught about bias in like a home ec class or garment sewing, that as long as you store things flat and you handle them carefully until that bias edge is sewn to something else. But we don't recommend you changing the bias, the way you're cutting the fabrics, because we've thought about this, and there's a reason we're encouraging you to do it in a certain way. But the other thing that occurred to me is that some of the reason that people are worried about bias stretching is that I think there may be an aspect of pressing that's throwing some people. So we've said we press our seams open, and you're welcome to press them any way you want. But it occurred to me as I was pressing our seams, I remembered the number of times I've seen in workshops, people take an iron and press it to the side, to press the seam to the side if they're pressing to the dark side or whatever. And it occurred to me, if you take a hot, steamy iron and you rub it across a bias seam like that, it is going to stretch. And if you instead think about pressing straight down,
lowering,
yeah,
just gently, yeah.
But
sorry.
So what I'm suggesting you do is to, if you want to press to the side, to finger press along the seam, not into the bias of the piece. So rather than taking an iron and pushing toward that bias, which is going to stretch it, if you finger press either open or to the side and then lower straight down the iron onto that, there is a difference between pressing and ironing. So rather than taking the iron and pushing the seam to the side, if you can work downward, you'll find less stretching in your block.
That's a great observation.
Okay.
Oh,
so you want to go ahead with the next?
Yeah, I'll give you a few technical, discuss a few technical things here. So what I'm going to do is slide that, thank you, Weeks, and reach forward here. Each of these installments is designed to be easily printed, and with installment 2, one of the pages is going to be a template. And if you've never worked with downloadable templates, the most important thing to know is a template is meant to be actual size. So when you print the installment, you really want to make sure that on your printer, it is, when you hit print, it prints actual size. So in the print dialog box, and there are hundreds of variations depending on your printer, there's often a little tick box that might say scale to fit or shrink to fit. You never want that selected, because what that does is it just makes the page a little bit smaller so that it doesn't accidentally cut anything off. Some printers actually say there's a tick box that says actual size or 100%. They're all different. So what we've done is on the template page, there's a little thing, a little square, and it says 1-inch test square. And once you've printed this out, just take a ruler. If that measures 1 inch, you're good to go. That means this is the actual size. If you measure it and it's like 1/8 of an inch too small or 1/16 of an inch too small, that means your printer shrunk something down, and it's a really easy fix. You go back and find the tick box that you missed. And I have this set up so that it will print without cutting off on anyone's printer. And I'm aware that we have European participants, and paper sizes are different there. So this whole mystery quilt, all the printing, that's taken into consideration so that you can print successfully wherever you are. And if you're in Australia, you're in Germany, great, you can print. So the template, let's talk about what this is. Weeks was talking about bias cuts. And the good news is this is about as simple a template as you can get. And I've got my magic layout here. Let me just put this all off to the side. Our goal is always to help you be successful with this. And what you're going to be doing for one of the steps is creating these, they're almost triangles, but the top is a little squared off. And we realize that you're going to take your template and transfer it to template plastic or even cardboard. Some people use cereal boxes because they're stiff, easy to cut, whatever works for you. I just happen to use template plastic. And I also transferred 2 little registration marks for this. And rather than have you put this on your fabric and cut, which is a lot of awkward cutting. So instead of doing that, what we have you do is cut out rectangles. And then you're going to do this and simply cut along the diagonal. So you're only cutting on that one side of the template. And once you do that, you'll flip and cut a second one out. There'll be a little thin scrap that you'll discard afterwards. And some of you might be like, why did you do that? That's inefficient. Actually, it just makes it a little easier because it's an unusual size because of the math.
The unusual size, I think what you're trying to say is that we don't want to give you a measurement of 3/16 or something,
Yeah.
or 5/16 to have to cut. It's just, it's easier to give you measurements in increments of 1/4 inches.
Yeah, an easy rectangle that you cut down. So the main thing we wanted to do here is to use the video as a chance to demystify and help teach, because part of the goal of this quilt is to have you learn new things. What you're going to do ultimately is make a bunch of blocks that look like this. And sewing them together requires, with right sides together, putting them there and sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, some people are used to lining up points, and things will go wrong if you don't line up correctly. So the instructions explain how to do this, but also there's a final page that is just a little tip sheet for people who are totally new to this. And it's kind of like, we've never done this before, have we? So what you can do, if you're new to this and nervous, you can actually lay one of your pieces right on top of one of the colors, and you have registration marks, but you basically are going to lay this one right on top of the other. It fits perfectly on top of the illustration. And if you want, we love the little clover fine point, what do you call this? Marker.
Marker, yeah.
And you can mark your 1/4 inch seam allowance if you want, or...
Before you pick it up,
yes.
can
Yeah.
I-
Yeah.
can I just-
Please.
This down here is everything is this right here.
Right there and right there. There's going
It's
to be...
not going to be
oops.
lined up, and it's going to look odd.
There's going to be a little kind of like ear-like...
Yeah, little bunny ears.
Bunny ears. And there's a blow-up diagram of that in the instructions. We're really trying to make this straightforward. So on the instructions, when you work on this, there's an enlarged detail that shows you exactly what those points look like. And for some of you, you'll be like, oh, piece of cake, got this. And others will be understandably nervous if it's the first time. So if you want, you can take some test fabrics and just do a pair to experiment. But once you get the hang of it, what you'll be doing is lining things up, pinning them, and then taking it to your sewing machine. And the cool thing is, if you've lined it up right, you're going from the little, like right between the ears is a 1/4 inch, and you're gonna sew straight down, and you're gonna come out right between the ears, because those are exactly a 1/4 inch. And then when you open it up, it'll press beautifully. I think Weeks talked about bias, and some people are worried like, oh, isn't this going to stretch? It's a long diagonal. Just handle it gently. Like we don't do anything really differently. We just cut, pin, sew, and then it is nicely anchored once it's sewed together.
But if you are pressing in this direction with the steam, it's very different than if you're pressing into the bias where it's going to stretch the most. Can you just show them, the pages that they will need for installment 2? That there are 4 pages total?
5 pages.
5 pages total,
yes.
Okay.
So when you download, there are, and it's a similar number of blocks that you're making. So we've tried to break this up so each week is a pretty similar amount of work. Or should I say a similar amount of fun?
That's a better way to put it.
So we've got 3 pages that show you the blocks or units that you're making. Then, in addition to that, there is a single page that is for your template. And then there's the extra kind of like bonus page that you can lay out to get the hang of putting the triangles together. So one other little tip that Weeks and I talk about a lot is if you have, I just have a sample of 2 pieces. This is not from this installment specifically, but if you are trying to sew a little checkerboard or 4 square, and you want those points to match nicely, you might see here that we have pressed our seams open. Press however you want. But the key for us to matching points is we put our pin right through the seam. And I don't know if you can see, I've marked a 1/4 inch where the ultimate seam will be. I'm not suggesting you have to mark this. I'm doing it just so you can see. But we actually put the pin right through the seam, a 1/4 inch from the edge. So the pin is exactly where your sewing is going to be. And we put it through the other piece also at a 1/4 inch so that we have it nicely pinned. And when we take it to our sewing machine and we sew that 1/4 inch seam allowance, the pin is anchoring the seam exactly where the seam is going to go. So it doesn't shift, and it leads to really actually precise points without a lot of hassle.
Exactly.
And you can do the same thing if you press to the side. Some of you may do the nesting seams trick. Totally up to you, whatever works for you. But I'm just showing you how we use pressing seams open and pinning exactly a 1/4 or very close to a 1/4 inch in, and then sewing.
So let us know how you're doing. We will be continuing to monitor questions as we're able. The group has been much bigger than we expected, and there's a lot of questions, and it's wonderful, but we can't get to every single post. So wherever possible, we're commenting and trying to support you so you are very clear about what you're doing. But I think we've tried with the video and instructions to make it easier even for beginners.
Yeah, the goal is, even if you just have the printout, you should be able to do this totally successfully. The video is supplemental, and we can't wait to see what you all do. You're making some really beautiful quilts.
Have fun.
Take care.